Harvard's unwavering stand, defending academic freedom in the heart of our great nation, where the pursuit of knowledge has always been a beacon of hope and progress. A profound challenge has emerged. Harvard University, an institution synonymous with academic excellence and innovation, now finds itself at the crossroads of a pivotal moment in our democracy. Recently, the Trump administration presented Harvard with a series of demands, calls to dismantle diversity programs, alter admissions and hiring practices, and cooperate with immigration enforcement. Harvard stood firm, choosing to uphold its principles and the sanctity of academic freedom. Now, let me take a moment to speak plainly, not just as a public figure, but as someone who has walked the halls of academia, who has seen firsthand how institutions of learning shape the lives of young people and the destiny of a nation. When a university stands at the crossroads of principle and power, it has a decision to make, not just about policy or paperwork, but about its very soul. That's where Harvard found itself, faced with a federal directive demanding it dismantle diversity programs, alter its admissions process, and essentially bow to a political agenda. Harvard did not waver. It did not hedge. It said no. That no wasn't just a rebuke of a particular administration's ideology. It was a declaration that the ideals of inclusion, academic integrity, and independence from political interference are not bargaining chips. They are non-negotiables. Think about what was being asked: to gut programs designed to uplift students from underserved communities, to undercut admissions policies that strive, not perfectly but earnestly, to create opportunity for all, not just the privileged few, to strip away the right of a private institution to chart its own path, to cultivate its own values. In short, the demand was simple: conform or pay the price. We've seen this before throughout our history. Power has tried again and again to bend institutions to its will. But the role of a university, its sacred duty, is not to follow the loudest voice in Washington. It is to challenge assumptions, to protect the pursuit of knowledge, to serve as a sanctuary for ideas, even the uncomfortable ones, and, above all, to remain free. Harvard's stand for integrity, Harvard's refusal, was not made in defiance for defiance's sake. It was made because the institution recognized that once you start compromising on foundational values, once you trade away academic freedom for convenience, you lose more than just funding. You lose your identity. You lose your credibility. You lose the very reason people come to learn, to grow, to imagine something better. And make no mistake, this wasn't just about Harvard. This was a signal to every college, every university, every school board in the country. If you dare to challenge the government's narrative, if you commit yourself to equity and truth, you might be next. But Harvard stood firm, not because it is immune to pressure, but because it understands that leadership sometimes means standing alone, that being a guardian of higher learning isn't always easy, that when the time comes, you either live your mission or you don't. Let's not pretend this kind of pressure is harmless. When the government says it's going to freeze billions of dollars in funding, it's not just flexing muscle. It's choking off lifelines to medical research, technological innovation, climate science, and the arts. It's punishing not just an institution, but the students who rely on it, the researchers who push the boundaries of human understanding, the communities that benefit from its breakthroughs. And yet, despite that enormous risk, the answer remained the same. Because there comes a time when you don't look at the balance sheet. You look at the future. You look at the kind of country you want your children and grandchildren to inherit. Now, to be clear, no institution is perfect. Harvard isn't. None of them are. They must all continue to evolve, to examine themselves, to become more inclusive, more transparent, more just. But that journey doesn't start by tearing them down at the hands of political convenience. It starts by giving them the room to grow in good faith and to stand on their values when they are tested. So, what Harvard did was an act of courage. It was a reminder that there are still places in this country that will not be bullied, that will not be bought, and that understand the difference between leadership and intimidation. It was a quiet but powerful statement that education must serve the people, not the politics of the moment. And in doing so, they reminded us all of something enduring, something unshakable, that the promise of America is not found in fear. It's found in freedom, in the courage to say, this far and no farther, in the strength to stand even when standing alone. That, my friends, is how change holds its ground. When we talk about federal funding for our institutions of higher learning, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about the lifeblood of research. We're talking about the catalyst for discovery, the fuel for innovation, and the quiet but powerful force that turns ideas into vaccines, algorithms, policy breakthroughs, and life-saving technologies. So when the government decides to freeze $2 billion in grants to one of the country's most prominent universities, it's not some minor clerical maneuver. It's not a bureaucratic pause. It's an unmistakable act of pressure designed to punish, to isolate, and to send a message that disagreement with those in power comes at a cost. Why institutions must defend democracy, let's be clear. These grants don't exist to enrich institutions. They exist to serve the public. They fund cancer research. They fund the development of clean energy. They support studies that improve how we teach our children, how we protect our environment, and how we respond to the next pandemic before it hits. These grants represent a partnership, a trust between the federal government and the academic community, that when we invest in knowledge, the whole nation benefits. And yet, in this case, that trust has been broken, not because of a mismanagement of funds, not because of academic misconduct, but because the institution in question chose to stand on principle, chose to say, in essence, our mission is bigger than any one administration. That choice, apparently, was too much, and the response was swift. The grants were frozen, the contracts withheld, over $2 billion cut off like a valve slammed shut. Now, imagine what that means in real terms. That's not just numbers disappearing from a balance sheet. That's graduate students suddenly without funding. That's entire departments scrambling to survive. It's researchers, scientists, educators, many of whom have nothing to do with the underlying dispute, watching their work, their livelihoods, their hopes for progress hang in the balance. But beyond the immediate disruption, there's something even more dangerous at play. A precedent. If a university can be financially punished for refusing to conform to the ideology of whoever holds office, then what happens to every other institution that dares to think independently? What happens to the pursuit of truth when the cost of that pursuit becomes too high? Because truth, real truth, often runs against the grain. It challenges, it provokes, it makes us uncomfortable. And that's what great universities do. They don't just produce job-ready graduates. They cultivate critical thinkers. They protect dissent. They encourage the kind of bold, unflinching dialogue that has always driven our democracy forward. A funding freeze like this one sends a chilling message, not just to Harvard, but to every college, every university, every researcher and student across the country. Stay in line or pay the price. And that's not how a confident nation behaves. That's not how a strong democracy operates. We don't build a better future by silencing the institutions that push us to be better. We don't strengthen the country by weakening the very places that have powered its greatest advances. We certainly don't lead the world in science, medicine, or technology by undermining the foundation of academic freedom. There's a reason why countries around the globe send their best and brightest to study here. It's not just the facilities or the credentials. It's the idea that in America, knowledge is not owned by the government. It is pursued freely, it is tested openly, and it belongs to everyone. Leadership in the age of division, so when that ideal is threatened, and when funding becomes a weapon rather than a tool, we all have to ask ourselves a simple question. What kind of country do we want to be? One that elevates the free exchange of ideas, or one that enforces silence through financial fear? This isn't just a story about a university in Massachusetts. It's a story about power and principle, about whether we are willing to protect the sacred space where inquiry happens, about whether we can still hold firm to the belief that public investment in knowledge should serve all people, not punish some. And while the funding may be frozen for now, the values that underpin these institutions, values of freedom, integrity, and fearless discovery, remain alive. They endure because truth, no matter how inconvenient, has a way of thawing even the coldest attempts to silence it. When a government tries to force an institution into submission, not through reason, not through debate, but through fear, there comes a point when standing still is no longer an option. There comes a point when the rule of law must step forward and remind us all that in this country, power is not above principle. And so, when the Trump administration froze over $2 billion in funding and threatened tax-exempt status in retaliation for non-compliance with politically driven demands, Harvard turned to the courts not as a gesture of defiance, but as an affirmation that no institution, no matter how powerful, is immune to the Constitution. Harvard filed suit, and in doing so, invoked one of the most sacred tenets of our democracy, the right to challenge the government when it overreaches. That lawsuit wasn't about money. It wasn't about prestige. It was about drawing a clear line in the sand and saying, this far and no farther. Because when the federal government begins using funding as a weapon to punish ideas it disagrees with, that's not governance. That's coercion. And in a constitutional democracy, coercion has no place. Academic freedom, the basis of Harvard's legal action, is rooted in the First Amendment, our guarantee of freedom of speech, of thought, of expression. The government cannot compel an institution to adopt a political stance under threat of financial ruin. That's not how the system works. That's not who we are. The lawsuit also challenges the administration's interpretation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination but does not give any president the authority to dictate how universities design programs aimed at promoting inclusion and equity. Now, it's important to understand that this isn't just a question for lawyers or judges. This is a question for all of us. Because if we allow the precedent to be set that federal dollars come with political strings, attached strings that tighten when you dare to disagree, then we are fundamentally reshaping what it means to be a free and open society. And that threat doesn't end at Harvard's gates. It can spread to community colleges, to public universities, to research labs, to non-profits, anywhere that ideas are formed, tested, and taught. Education's role in defending truth, Harvard's decision to go to court, is an act of civic responsibility. It's the recognition that silence in the face of abuse isn't neutrality. It's surrender. And this country was not built by those who surrendered when things got tough. It was built by those who believed that the law, imperfect as it is, could still be a shield against injustice, who believed that the courts were not just venues for procedure, but for principle. This lawsuit is also a signal to students, particularly those from marginalized communities, that their presence, their voice, and their potential are worth protecting, that their right to learn in an environment that values inclusion is not just a preference. It's a constitutional matter, and that when that right is threatened, there are still institutions willing to fight for them. Of course, legal action takes time. It's slow. It's complex. It winds through courts and motions and appeals. But history has shown us that the courtroom can be a powerful stage for change. It's where Brown v. Board of Education was decided. It's where the rights of workers, immigrants, and the LGBTQ+ community have been upheld. And now, it's where the question of academic independence will be tested. The outcome of Harvard's lawsuit will echo far beyond one university. It will speak to the kind of country we are becoming. Are we a nation that welcomes challenge, that embraces diverse perspectives, that protects the right to dissent? Or are we a nation where compliance is demanded, where thought is regulated, and where funding becomes a leash to control the voice of the academy? That question is now before the court, but it's also before each of us in how we engage, how we speak up, and how we protect the institutions that make our democracy stronger. In the end, Harvard did not choose this fight, but when it came, they answered, not with slogans, not with politics, but with the law, with the Constitution, with the belief that the arc of the moral universe still bends toward justice, but only if we keep reaching for it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, when a single university is challenged, when its autonomy is tested. It may seem at first like an isolated event, a political standoff, a news headline. But if you look a little deeper, if you listen a little more closely, you begin to understand that what's really on trial is something far larger. The future of higher education in America. Because when an institution like Harvard comes under pressure for refusing to fall in line with a government agenda, it's not just about that one school. It's about what it signals to every campus across this country. It's about the message it sends to presidents of state colleges, to community college deans, to public university boards, and to the young student who dreams of being the first in their family to graduate. That message is loud and clear. Disagree, and you may be next. This isn't a theoretical threat. When political actors begin dictating what can be taught, how it can be taught, and who is allowed to benefit from education, we lose the very essence of what our institutions were built to protect: independent thought, critical reasoning, and a shared commitment to the pursuit of truth. That pursuit has never been easy. It's never been neat, but it has always been essential. Over the last several years, we've seen an unsettling trend. Efforts to rewrite curriculums, to ban books, to silence discussion around race, gender, and history. And now, with this latest action freezing billions in federal funding as punishment for a university's refusal to comply with a political demand, we are entering even more dangerous territory, because it means that the government is not just disagreeing with ideas. It's actively trying to control them. The power of the people now, let's be honest. Higher education has its challenges: rising costs, gaps in access, institutional inertia that too often protects the powerful and leaves the marginalized behind. But the answer to those challenges isn't to dismantle universities. It's to make them better, to make them more accessible, more accountable, more inclusive. And you don't do that by turning colleges into political tools. You do it by trusting them to do what they've always done best: challenge young people to think more deeply, to see more clearly, to act more boldly. When we allow political intimidation to take hold in our academic institutions, we lose more than freedom. We lose potential. We lose innovation. We lose the energy and brilliance of researchers who might have cured a disease, or engineers who might have revolutionized clean energy, or poets who might have changed how we see the world. That's not just a loss for our schools. That's a loss for our country. And make no mistake, if this kind of intervention becomes normalized, it won't stop at elite universities. It will spread. It will show up in state legislatures deciding which majors deserve public funding. It will affect tenure decisions, grant approvals, even classroom syllabi. It will erode the very fabric of academic independence, replacing scholarship with obedience. But there is still hope, because the academic community is resilient. Faculty, students, and administrators across the country are watching what's happening. They are speaking out. They are organizing. They are refusing to accept a future where education is dictated by politics rather than principles. This is a moment of clarity, a reminder that universities are not just places where young people earn degrees. They are places where society is shaped, where we wrestle with who we've been and imagine who we might become. If those places fall under the thumb of political pressure, if their mission becomes subject to the whims of power, then we all suffer. Not just the students, not just the scholars, but the entire nation. Because the strength of America has always rested in its willingness to invest in learning, to empower the curious, to protect the unpopular opinion, to understand that progress doesn't come from echo chambers. It comes from the messy, difficult, necessary work of debate, of discovery, of disagreement. Values over victory. So, let this be more than a moment of outrage. Let it be a call to vigilance. Let it be a reminder that the defense of higher education is not just the job of professors or presidents. It's a shared responsibility. It belongs to every parent who wants their child to dream bigger, every student who believes knowledge can unlock the world, every citizen who understands that the freedom to think openly is the foundation of a healthy democracy. The question before us is simple. Will we allow our schools to become battlegrounds in a political war? Or will we rise to protect them as beacons of possibility? Our answer will define not just the state of education, but the state of our union. There are moments in public life that seem technical on the surface. Legal designations, financial classifications, the kind of details that usually stay buried in the fine print. But every now and then, one of those details becomes a flashpoint, a symbol, a test of whether we still believe in fairness, in freedom, and in the principles that have long defined this country. The threat to revoke a university's tax-exempt status is one of those moments. Now, let's not pretend this is just about taxes, because when the federal government threatens to take away a university's nonprofit status, it's not about accounting. It's about control. It's about sending a message. Fall in line, or we'll come after your foundation. And that's not how a democracy should operate. That's how fear operates. That's how coercion takes hold. For over a century, educational institutions in this country, public and private, have been granted tax-exempt status, not as a favor, but as a recognition of their unique role in our society. These are not corporations seeking profit. These are communities of learning, discovery, and service. They teach our children. They conduct groundbreaking research. They serve the public good. That's the social contract. And that's why the tax code treats them the way it does, because we all benefit when knowledge grows. But when that status is suddenly threatened, not because of fraud, not because of financial mismanagement, but because a university refuses to follow a partisan script, then we have to ask, what is this really about? This is about a broader effort to politicize education, to punish institutions that dare to foster independent thinking, that create space for diverse perspectives, that believe students should be exposed to the full complexity of our history and our present. It's not just about Harvard or Yale or Stanford. It's about whether any school, any professor, any student can speak honestly, teach freely, and learn courageously without wondering if tomorrow their institution will be targeted by those in power. Because once the tax-exempt status of a university becomes conditional on ideology, there is no end to that logic. Who's next? A religious school that teaches climate science, a historically black college that centers racial justice, a community college that offers courses on gender identity. This is not just a threat to one school. It's a threat to academic independence everywhere. What's particularly dangerous about this tactic is that it doesn't rely on persuasion. It doesn't invite debate. It doesn't say, let's have a conversation about the role of higher education in a changing society. No, it says, Do what we say, or we'll hurt you. That's not public policy. That's extortion. And here's the truth. We've seen this strategy before. In moments of national fear, institutions have been threatened for refusing to toe the line during the Red Scare, during the Civil Rights Movement, even during the early days of the fight against apartheid. Whenever power feels threatened by thought, it tries to silence the places where thought is nurtured. But here's the other truth. Those attempts have never worked, not in the long run. Because you can freeze funding, you can strip status, you can try to legislate loyalty, but you can't kill ideas. You can't stop the truth from finding its way to the surface. You can't contain a mind once it's been opened. So when the government suggests that a university's right to exist as a nonprofit depends on political obedience, it's not just undermining a legal structure. It's eroding trust. Trust that our leaders understand the difference between disagreement and disloyalty. Trust that public service is guided by law, not vendetta. That we are still a nation that values education, not just for its utility, but for its ability to transform. Final call to action and reflection. Let me say this plainly. Threatening tax exempt status is not a policy disagreement. It's a threat to the moral fabric of our educational system, and it requires a response not just from the courts, but from citizens, from alumni, from students, from anyone who understands what's at stake when we allow fear to dictate who gets to teach and who gets to think. Because if we go down this path, if we let every new administration decide which institutions are worthy based on political loyalty, we don't just weaken schools, we weaken democracy itself. We turn education into an instrument of compliance, not a tool of liberation. So the question isn't just whether Harvard or any other university keeps its tax-exempt status. The question is whether we still believe in the fundamental promise of education in a free society. That knowledge, in all its messy, beautiful, uncomfortable glory, belongs to everyone, and that no government should ever stand in its way.